Hello and welcome back to Cursed Lullabies. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered like cursed lullabies, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. I don't know why I did it. I still can't explain what part of me thought it was a good idea. All I know is that I did it, and I paid for it in a way I wouldn't wish on anyone. It started as a normal night at the local fair. A few friends and I met up in town, walking around with that careless, happy energy you only get when you've got no real responsibilities for the next 12 hours. We laughed, we wandered, we ate everything that could be fried. Fried Oreos were the first big win. They came out hot and soft, dusted with so much powdered sugar it got on your fingers and your shirt, and you didn't even care. After that, it was funnel cake, of course, loaded with toppings. Someone had a Boston cream pie funnel cake, and honestly, I still don't fully understand what makes it Boston or why it counts as pie, but it tasted incredible, so I stopped asking questions. We went on a couple rides, the kind that make your stomach float and your legs feel weak after. The whole night had that loud, bright, messy fair feeling. Music bleeding out of speakers, people shouting over each other, lights flashing, the smell of sugar and grease and sweat all mixed together. Then we drifted toward a darker corner of the fairgrounds, away from the main lights. That's where we saw her, a fortune teller. The sign out front had the kind of painted lettering you see in old movies. Gypsy Witch, it said, like the person who wrote it had never met a real human being in their life. The card actually looked legit, too. Wooden wheels, polished wood panels, little hanging charms that clicked softly in the breeze. It had a tent attached, and the tent was dim, lit by warm lantern light. My friends loved it immediately. They were already joking about who was going to get told they'd marry rich or die young or whatever. I didn't believe in any of it, not even a little. To me, this was just another fair attraction, like the haunted house ride or the games where the basketball hoop is slightly smaller than it should be. But they were excited, and I was in a good mood, so I went along. Inside the tent, there were layers of fabric you had to walk through, like curtains inside curtains. The air got thick with incense and burning sage. It clung to your hair and your clothes. By the time we got to the main space, my eyes were already watering a little. An old woman sat behind a table with a crystal ball. She looked the part perfectly. Silver streaks ran through dark hair, heavy jewelry, a face lined with age but sharp around the eyes. Her posture was straight, like she was used to being looked at. I laughed at the whole setup because it was so cliché. I sat down with my friends, and when each of them went up for a reading, I couldn't help myself. I snorted. I muttered jokes under my breath. Not quietly either. Quiet enough that I could pretend I wasn't being rude, but loud enough that everyone could hear. My friends shushed me and tried not to laugh. The old woman ignored it at first. Then it was my turn. I leaned forward and held out my palm, smiling like I was giving her an easy target. I expected her to roll with it, tell me I'd have a long journey and a surprise opportunity, and I'd make my jokes and we'd leave. The old woman looked down at my hand, then up at my face. Her eyebrows pulled together, stern for a moment. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and then, slowly, she smiled back at me. "I see lots of things in your future," she said. And she laughed the way someone laughs when they're in on your joke. "I see love lost. I see the death of a loved one. And I see a promotion at work." Then she smiled wider, showing teeth that were rotted and dark. And somehow that smile didn't feel like part of the act anymore. It felt too real. I couldn't help it. I smirked and started to pull my hand back. "Thanks, lady, for the vague information." Her hand shot out and grabbed both my wrists. Her grip was stronger than it should have been. Cold, too, like she'd been holding ice water. "I see a curse in your future," she said, still smiling. "I will come to you when I think you have had enough. Then she let go like nothing had happened. I rubbed my wrists and laughed, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. She chuckled too, soft and low, like she'd said something clever. My friends were half creeped out and half amused. We left the tent and tried to shake it off. For the rest of the night, we went on a few more rides and ate a little more. But that moment stuck to the back of my mind like a burr. Still, by the time we started walking home, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. We all lived close to each other, which was part of why we were friends. It was easy to meet up, easy to hang out. Connor had met Genevieve in the most ridiculous way. He almost hit her with his car. Instead of screaming at him like a normal person, she'd flirted, and they'd ended the whole thing laughing. I'd known Connor first, so that's how I met Genevieve. Josh was my childhood friend. He knew the rest of them through me. Miley was part of our group too, but she didn't come out much. She was working on it. She had anxiety that didn't look like the cute, nervous kind you see in movies. She had real issues leaving the house sometimes, real fear of germs, real panic that could shut her down. Her therapist had a list of diagnoses for her. I wasn't going to pretend I understood all of it, but I did think the psychiatrist was probably right about most things. I also thought the medication dosage they had her on might have calmed her, but it wasn't doing her body any favors. That night, though, it was just the four of us. We split off at our streets and said goodnight. I unlocked my front door, went inside, and felt the exhaustion hit all at once. I hadn't stayed out that late in a long time. Pushing past your early 20s makes late nights feel less fun and more like punishment. I caught myself thinking, I'm getting old, and I hated the thought so much I tried to shove it away. I got ready for bed, set my 5 a.m. alarm, and slid under the covers. I had this pillow that felt perfect, like it had been molded for my head alone. Every time I laid down on it, it felt like luxury. I fell asleep fast. The next morning, I woke up with a sore throat. At first, I thought it was nothing. Dry air, maybe. Allergies. I coughed a few times to clear it, deep coughs that made my throat scrape. And then something slapped my tongue. Not my own tongue moving. Something else, something wet and fleshy, flicking forward from the back of my throat like a hand tapping to get my attention. I sat straight up, choking on panic. I shoved my fingers toward the back of my mouth on instinct, like I could grab whatever it was and pull it out. My fingertips brushed something soft, something thick. I ran to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and leaned close to the mirror with my mouth open as wide as I could manage. I angled my phone flashlight in, trying to flood the back of my throat with light. What I saw made my knees go weak. There was a lump of muscle-like flesh lodged back there, not blocking my airway, but definitely there, pulsing slightly like it had its own life. It had two bulging eyes, wide and ridiculous like cheap, googly eyes, and beneath them was a tiny human mouth. I screamed. The thing in my throat slapped my tongue again, harder, like it was annoyed. I don't like that, it said. The voice wasn't muffled. It wasn't garbled. It was clear. And worse than that, I could hear it in two places at once, out loud and inside my head like it was vibrating through my skull. What the fuck? I whispered, which hurt. If it was a parasite, if it was some horrible tumor, if it was anything physical, I could pull it out. I could fix it. Ouch! Stop it! The thing screamed, and the sound inside my head rang like a bell. Pain spiked behind my eyes. I jerked my hand away and stared at it in the mirror, breathing hard. I'm Sammy, it said, and somehow it sounded smug. Nice to meet you in your prodding hands, by the way. I'm just here to hang out for a while. The fleshy lump settled back like it was getting comfortable. I stood there, shaking. What is happening to me right now? My voice cracked around the words. Is this the day I finally go insane? Please stop being so rough with me, Sammy snapped. And the tone hit me in the gut because it reminded me of my dad when I was a kid and I'd done something wrong. I don't appreciate it. I need to go to the doctor, I said, more to myself than to Sammy. This will clear up. It'll be fine. I moved on, autopilot. Backpack. keys. Out the door. I got into my car and called my doctor's office, pushing until someone squeezed me in. I drove like a maniac, parked, and rushed inside. At the front desk, they handed me a clipboard with forms that already had my information printed, like they always do. I sat down and realized they hadn't even given me a pen. I dug through my bag until I found one and filled out everything, trying to keep my breathing steady. Personal info, insurance, the same stupid questions you answer every time, even though nothing changes. Then I turned it in and was told to keep waiting. So I waited for an hour. By the time they finally called me back, I was furious and scared and exhausted all at once. They led me down a hallway, turned a corner, and put me in a room with that awful exam table covered in paper that crinkles no matter how still you try to sit. I waited longer. When the doctor came in, he was cheerful in that practiced way. He checked my vitals, scribbled notes, then looked at the reason for my visit. "So you've got a sore throat," he said. I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. He told me to open wide. He pushed a tongue depressor into my mouth, and I tried not to gag. He shined a light, peered in, and made a small hum noise. When he was done, he rolled back to his computer and typed. "Looks like strep," he said. "I'll send over a couple prescriptions. You can pick them up at the pharmacy down the hall." Strep doesn't have eyes and a mouth. Strep doesn't talk. But how do you argue that without sounding like you need a psych evaluation instead of antibiotics? I swallowed my rage and left. I picked up the prescriptions, went home, and tried to take the pills immediately because I needed something, anything, to feel normal again. The first pill didn't go down. It hit the back of my throat and stopped like there was a hand blocking it. I gagged and spit it back into my palm. I tried again with water, and the same thing happened. The pill rose up with the water, rejected. "Those are not going to help you," Sammy said. "Stop trying to take them. It hurts when you swallow." I felt Sammy shift, and pain pinched deep in my throat, enough to make my eyes water, but not enough to choke me, like it wanted me uncomfortable, not dead. "How do I make you go away?" I asked, and I hated how desperate I sounded. "I'll just go away sometime," Sammy said. I felt something wet slide down my throat like it had shifted position, settling deeper. "When is sometime?" I demanded. "Just sometimes," Sammy said, and I could feel the fleshy mound do something like a shrug, tugging at muscle inside my mouth. "I don't know what that means," I shouted, and the shout scraped my throat raw. Sammy slapped my tongue again. Offended. "Don't yell," it snapped. I sank onto my couch with my phone flashlight and a hand mirror, angling the light so I could see Sammy clearly. In the back of my throat, it looked like the face of a wrinkled little old man lounging in my mouth like it lived there. Its eyes rolled slightly, as if it was bored. Its tiny mouth smirked. Sammy. The name made me nauseous. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten. I hadn't even had coffee. I turned on loud music and cooked eggs and bacon, trying to drown out the feeling of something sitting right beside my uvula. I moved around my kitchen like everything was normal, like I wasn't living inside a nightmare. When I sat down to eat, I lifted a forkful of eggs and tried to swallow. My throat refused. The bite sat in my mouth and I had to spit it out. I tried again, slower, forcing myself to swallow. Same thing. My body rejected it like poison. "Are you doing this?" I asked, voice shaking. Sammy slapped my tongue a few times before answering, like it was thinking about whether it wanted to respond. "Stop swallowing. Everything hurts me," it complained. "I need to eat," I said, and anger finally punched through my fear. "I can't just—" "Well, I need to breathe," Sammy replied, as if that settled the argument. It tapped against my uvula, making my throat tickle. "Don't laugh. Or cough either. I don't like that." The calm, strict tone sent chills down my back. Sammy noticed it, giggled, pleased with itself. I sat in front of my untouched plate until my hunger became a dull ache. Then I gave up and went back to the couch, miserable. My body wasn't used to missing breakfast. The weakness came fast. Sammy stayed quiet as long as I kept my mouth shut. That became my new rule. If I didn't talk, if I didn't cough, if I didn't laugh, Sammy tolerated me. If I tried to swallow, it punished me. If I made noise, it got annoyed. In the middle of the day, I felt a sudden, sharp pain, like a needle stabbing the back of my mouth. I rushed to the mirror, heart pounding. Sammy had changed. Spines had grown out of the fleshy lump, sharp little thorns, glistening with moisture. They pressed into the soft tissue of my throat, and when I tried to close my mouth, the spikes seemed to extend, as if closing my jaw would drive them deeper. I moaned and forced my mouth open as wide as I could, panting, tears spilling from my eyes. "Okay," I whispered, barely moving my lips. "Okay, I get it." The spines retracted slow and deliberate, like a threat being put away, not removed. After that, I understood, completely. I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink properly, I couldn't take medication, I couldn't cough or laugh or even yawn without risking pain. I could only exist quietly and hope Sammy got bored. That night, I tried to follow my normal routine anyway. I got ready for bed, careful and silent. I put on my favorite podcast, something I listened to every night, a familiar voice to fall asleep to. Sammy hated it. Pain exploded in my throat as the spines shot out again, slicing the back of my mouth. I cried out, which made it worse, because sound meant movement, and movement meant spikes grinding into flesh. Tears poured down my face. I turned the podcast off and sat there, trembling, until my breathing steadied. Slowly, Sammy retracted the spines again. It went quiet, satisfied. The next morning, I moved like my body was made of glass. I didn't yawn. I didn't clear my throat. When a cough tried to rise, I crushed it down before it became sound, because even the vibration was a warning. Sammy rewarded me with a few irritated slaps on my tongue like a boss tapping a desk. Then I remembered I had work. I texted my boss that I couldn't speak. I kept it simple, hoping he'd take it seriously. He replied almost immediately, and the message might as well have been a middle finger. He didn't care. I was expected in within 2 hours. I stood in my kitchen staring at my phone, feeling trapped. I was starving, weak, and now I had to go spend a whole day pretending I was fine while something lived in my throat and controlled my body. I got dressed quietly. Before I left, I made a sign on paper in thick, bold letters. "Cannot speak. Very contagious." I figured contagious would do what honesty couldn't. The drive to work was tolerable as long as I didn't turn on music. Sammy preferred silence. Or worse, he seemed to like boring sounds, like dull audiobook narration from some monotone guy who could drive a person insane just by reading a grocery list. At work, I held up the sign and nodded a lot. Most people backed off the moment they saw "very contagious." I played it up with tired eyes and small gestures. I avoided conversations. I avoided everything. By lunchtime, I was shaking with hunger. I thought maybe, I could get something down if it was liquid. I made a smoothie, my favorite kind, and sat with a trash can beside me just in case. I took a deep breath and tried a sip. Instant rejection. The smoothie came right back up. I bent over the trash can and spit it out, humiliation burning my face even though no one was watching. Tears slid down my cheeks. I wiped them away hard, angry at myself for crying like it mattered. I went back to my desk, feeling hollow. Later, I had to make phone calls. I tried to avoid it, but it was part of my job. The first call forced sound out of me, and Sammy punished me for it with a sudden spike of pain that made my eyes blur. I ended up choking out the shortest phrases I could manage, voice raw, body trembling. I cried quietly in the bathroom afterward, holding my mouth open like that would keep the spines from pressing in. By the time I drove home, I was sobbing so hard I had to pull over once just to breathe. At home, I stared at my kitchen and realized I couldn't even pour myself a glass of wine to calm down. I couldn't swallow it. I couldn't take anything for anxiety. I couldn't do the simple comfort things people do when they're falling apart. I sat at my dinner table with nothing in front of me, imagining food, trying to trick my body into feeling full. My stomach cramped with hunger. My hands shook. I tried to negotiate with Sammy, whispering as softly as possible. It didn't care. Every time I tried to bring up my needs, it ignored me or slapped my tongue like I was annoying it. The message was clear. My body wasn't mine anymore. That night, I got ready for bed like I was disarming a bomb. No sneezing, no coughing, no sudden movement. I climbed into bed and tried to sleep. I did sleep, at least for a little while, because I remember waking up in pain. My throat felt blocked, pressured. Panic shot through me and I made a strangled noise. Sammy punished me immediately, pain flaring until I cried out again, which made it worse, a loop I couldn't break until I forced myself to stop making sound entirely. I lay there shaking in the dark, swallowing nothing, breathing carefully, terrified of my own body. You were snoring so much I couldn't take it anymore, Sammy snapped, irritated like I'd been rude. I didn't move. I didn't respond. I lay staring at the ceiling with my eyes wide open, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to snore, too afraid to do anything. When my alarm went off, I forgot myself for half a second and yawned. Twice because I couldn't stop it once it started. Pain tore through my mouth and suddenly I tasted blood. I went to the couch and sat there staring at the blank TV, exhausted, starving, half delirious. My body felt like it was failing. My mind felt like it was shrinking. That's when I saw her. At first I thought it was a hallucination from hunger and lack of sleep. Then I realized she was really sitting behind me, like she'd always been there. The fortune teller from the fair, she sat down beside me as casually as if she was dropping by for coffee. Her hair looked the same, her eyes sharp. She smelled faintly of sage and smoke. "Have you learned anything?" she asked. I wasn't going to speak, not for anything. "Do you want the curse to go away?" she asked, and her hand slid into the folds of her robe. She pulled out a jar. Inside was a blackish-red slime that clung to the glass like it was alive. It looked thick, like old blood mixed with tar. "Drink this," she said, holding it out. I stared at it, fear pushing bile up the back of my throat. Every instinct told me not to. But then I thought about another day like yesterday. Another day of hunger and pain and helplessness. Another night of being afraid to breathe wrong. The old woman tilted her head. "It's all right. Take it." I took the jar with shaking hands. Then I did what she said. I tipped it back and let the slime slide into my mouth. The taste was disgusting. Onion sharpness and something like sulfur, like rotten eggs and burned metal. It clung to my tongue, and when it hit the back of my throat, Sammy reacted like I'd poured acid on it. Pain flared. The spines shot out, tearing at me. I gagged and coughed and tried to force the slime down anyway, because now there was only one option: swallow or suffer forever. I coughed harder, eyes watering, throat burning. I felt Sammy thrash, swelling, fighting. I felt it burning away, not like a physical thing dissolving, but like something being erased. The pain peaked so high it became almost unreal, like my body couldn't process it anymore. When the jar was empty, I tried to straighten up, shaking, breath coming in ragged pulls. For a single quiet moment, I thought it worked. Then my stomach heaved. I bent forward and vomited a thick black waterfall onto my carpet. It came out in ropes and clumps, sticky and shining. I gagged again and again until my ribs hurt, until my eyes blurred, until I was just dry heaving over the mess, like my body was trying to turn itself inside out. Finally, I stopped. I sat there, trembling, a puddle of black goo in front of me, the air stinking like sulfur and bile. I didn't know how I was going to clean it up. I didn't know how I was going to explain it to anyone if they saw it. I didn't know anything except that I was still breathing. The old woman watched me with that crooked, rotted smile. I opened my mouth and, hesitantly, I shouted, "Just to test it. No pain." I ran to the bathroom mirror, mouth open. flashlight on. The back of my throat was empty. No lump, no eyes, no tiny mouth, no spines. Sammy was gone. I ran back to the living room, ready to confront the witch, ready to demand answers, ready to scream at her. The room was empty. Of course it was. I stood there staring at the spot where she'd been sitting, then let out a shaky laugh that turned into something close to sobbing. I should have known she wouldn't stick around for thank yous or questions. I went straight to the kitchen without even looking at the carpet again. I didn't care about the mess. I didn't care about anything except food. I made the biggest plate of spaghetti I could. I didn't even sit down at the table. I stood over the counter and ate like a person who'd been starving in the desert. Every swallow was bliss. Every bite felt like life returning to my body. Later, when my hands finally stopped shaking, I poured a glass of wine, then another. Then I just opened a bottle and drank straight from it like I was celebrating a survival I didn't fully understand. That night, I slept hard. I snored. I drooled. I breathed like a normal person. Nothing stabbed me awake. The next day, I talked at work. I laughed at jokes. I answered the phone. I drank water without fear. I ate lunch like it was the most normal thing in the world. And in the middle of all that normality, a thought settled into me and stayed there, heavy and permanent. I didn't care what anyone said. I didn't care how ridiculous it sounded. If curses were real, then anything could be real. And I was never, ever going to risk something like that again. Story 2. Death has fascinated me for as long as I can remember. The fear comes attached to that fascination, like a second shadow. I can't make my brain accept that something as complicated as a human being can just stop. 1 minute you're here, thinking, breathing, remembering. The next minute, there's nothing. No awareness. No you. I've always thought of us as these living machines, meat and bone powered by wiring we can't see. A biological system doing its best to keep running until the day it doesn't. The idea of that expiration date makes my mind sprint. It doesn't stroll into the thought. It kicks the door down and drags me through worst-case scenes until I feel sick. When I was a kid, I started building little rituals to keep those thoughts away. I didn't call them rituals then. I just called them things I had to do. If I scraped my arm in a certain way, my brain would tell me I had to recreate the same scrape on the other arm, the same direction, the same length, or something terrible would happen. Sometimes the threat was huge and ridiculous, like the world would explode. Sometimes it was smaller but somehow worse, like my mom would die, or a car would crash, or I would wake up one day and everyone would be gone. The logic made no sense, and I knew that, but the fear behind it was real. My anxiety would claw from behind my eyes until I gave in. And once I gave in, the rules would change. The rituals would escalate. They always escalated. It was like feeding an animal that only grows hungrier. As I got older, I learned how to calm them down. I didn't cure anything. I just got better at hiding it, better at steering myself away before I spiraled too far. I could keep my hands busy. I could count in my head. I could force myself to walk away from whatever pattern my brain demanded. But now, walking toward the end of my family line all by myself, those rituals feel like the only tools I have left. My dad died when I was still in elementary school. My sister and I haven't spoken in years. And last week, my mother finally lost her fight with a disease that had been eating its way through her for so long that it felt like it had moved into our house and started paying rent. I'm 26, freshly orphaned, and I'm supposed to just keep going, like life doesn't shatter and leave sharp pieces everywhere. Mom was my anchor. After Dad died, she became both parents without acting like she deserved a medal for it. She didn't ask for anything except love, and she gave it even when we didn't know how to return it. After Dad was gone, my rituals got worse. Death wasn't a distant concept anymore. It was in our living room, sitting in the empty chair at dinner. It was in the way Mom's voice sounded when she thought we weren't listening. It was in the way my sister, Laura, stopped being a carefree teenager and started moving like someone older. Looking back, I can see how much attention my issues stole. I needed comfort all the time. Reassurance, checking, repeating, fixing. I didn't mean to be selfish, but kids don't always understand the weight they put on a parent. And the compulsions weren't something I chose. They were something that happened to me, inside me, like a bad program running in the background. Laura was 14 when Dad died, a few years older than me. Dad left a small inheritance, money meant for college once we turned 18. Those 4 years crawled by. We learned a new normal. Mom worked and worried. Laura worked too. Constantly, she became the kind of teenager who stayed busy so she wouldn't have to sit still with her thoughts. Then she turned 18, got her inheritance, and disappeared. No big goodbye, no dramatic blow-up that I remember. She was just gone. Mom tried to reach her. Calls, messages, emails, letters she never admitted to writing until I found one half finished on the kitchen table. The years passed, and Laura stayed away. Mom's heartbreak became quiet and permanent, like a bruise that never healed. Then, after about 3 years, Laura came back. She looked smaller, not just thinner, smaller, like the world had pressed down on her and reshaped her. Her eyes were red and puffy, surrounded by deep, dark rings. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in months. From what I know, Mom didn't interrogate her. She didn't demand details or explanations. She just opened the door and let Laura back in. I didn't ask questions either. I didn't know how, and for a while it seemed like maybe Laura was healing. She ate. She showered. She sat at the table with us. She even laughed once or twice. And each time it happened, it felt fragile, like glass you don't want to touch too hard. But while I was away at college, things slid again. Laura became erratic. It came out that she'd been siphoning money from Mom. Little withdrawals at first, then bigger ones. Then came the addictions, plural. Pills, alcohol, whatever she could get her hands on. It was like she was trying to fill a hole that couldn't be filled, so she kept pouring more into it. When Mom confronted her, Laura didn't just deny it. She spiraled. She started talking about a man stalking her from the shadows, a man who'd been there since Dad passed away. She said he watched her like prey. She said he followed her into rooms and stood behind her when she slept. She said he never spoke, only stared. Mom tried to protect her. Mom always tried. She talked about recovery, about second chances, about how Laura was sick and needed help, not shame. But I was furious. I couldn't handle Laura using Dad's death like a shield, as if trauma excused everything. I couldn't handle the way Mom kept bleeding herself dry to save her. I snapped. My anger took the wheel. And once anger drives, it doesn't care where it's going. I said things I can't take back. Laura said things too. Mom cried. Laura left. We haven't spoken since. After that, my compulsions never fully went away. They just got quieter and more sneaky. I slipped them into my daily life like small lies I told myself. I'd scratch certain spots on my scalp when I was anxious until they felt raw. I'd make patterns while scrolling, tapping like on posts in sets that had to feel balanced, or my brain would start whispering threats. Sometimes I'd type and delete and retype words until the sentence felt right in a way I couldn't explain. Like if I didn't, something bad would happen. The threats were always irrational. The demons will crawl up from the earth. Everyone will die. You'll cause it. It was never reasonable. But anxiety doesn't speak the language of reason. It speaks in pressure, in dread, in certainty without evidence. When Mom got her diagnosis, I promised myself I would repay her. I moved back in with her. I became an in-home nurse without the title, juggling caregiving during the day and working toward my master's degree at night. It was exhausting, but it felt like the least I could do for the woman who held our family together with her bare hands. And as her health declined, my rituals got harsher again. Every time I opened a prescription bottle, I had to tap it and shake it lightly first, like I was making sure it worked. When we walked into a hospital room, I had to blink a certain number of times, crossing the threshold. an absurd number that my brain insisted mattered. The dark thoughts kept showing up too, quick and unwanted, like flashes of images I didn't ask to see. Mom eventually had to be moved into hospice. Her needs became more than I could safely handle. She told me she wanted me to go on with my life, that she didn't want my entire future to become a hospital room. I agreed, but it didn't feel like a real choice. I cried myself to sleep, imagining her dying in the night with no one she loved beside her. The guilt was constant, like a low fever that never broke. Laura visited her in hospice. A nurse told me she'd come, and later Mom told me Laura and her had made peace. Mom sounded relieved when she said it, like that reconciliation was something she'd been carrying around for years. Even then, I didn't reach out. Even then, my anger wouldn't let me bend. After the funeral, there was no attempt at reconciliation. Not from her, not from me. Assets got split through lawyers. I didn't even ask what Laura got because I inherited the house and didn't want another conversation that might turn into a fight. At the service, we stood at opposite sides of the room like strangers. I didn't look at her. She didn't look at me. People offered condolences while I fought the urge to scratch my skin open just to quiet my head. Compulsions are great at building loneliness. You isolate yourself not because you want to, but because everything is easier when nobody's watching you lose control. I realized how complete my isolation was in the most ordinary way, in an emergency room lobby with a clipboard in my hands. My eyes scanned down the intake form until they landed on the line that read, "Emergency contact." I walked up to the nurse's window and slid the paperwork through the small opening in the glass. "What's the number here?" I asked. And without thinking, I wrote my own phone number in the emergency contact field, digit by digit, like I didn't even notice what I was doing until it was done. I wasn't in ERs often, but that night I'd felt a sharp, deep pain low in my abdomen that triggered a flood of panic. My brain immediately jumped to appendicitis, and appendicitis in my mind wasn't just painful. It was a final door slamming shut. I drove to West Regional Community Hospital like I was outrunning the thought itself. In the waiting room, I rubbed my hands on the chair, arms over and over, trying to ground myself. The room was sterile beige with dark leather seats, the kind with old social distancing stickers still peeling up from the cushions. A TV in the corner played cartoons at low volume, cheerful sounds that didn't belong in a place where people came to suffer. There weren't many people in there. It was late. Aside from the ambulance that arrived shortly after I checked in, the room stayed quiet. A mother and her son sat a few chairs down from me. The boy slept under a blanket, face turned into her side. The mother's eyes drifted across the TV without really watching it. Behind me, I could sense someone sitting or standing. I never saw him come in. I didn't want to turn around and make it obvious, but I could feel the heat of being watched. The heavy focus of a stare aimed right through my back and toward the ER doors. The doors swung open with a soft mechanical click. A woman in navy scrubs stepped out and called my name, Kieran. I raised my hand and followed her down the hallway for vitals and basic questions. My pain flared when I moved sharp enough to make my vision stutter. On the far side of the department behind the nurses' station, I saw a windowed trauma room where doctors and nurses were clustered around a patient with an oxygen mask. Their movements were fast and practiced, hands going from tool to body to monitor like a choreographed routine. I assumed this was the ambulance patient. My mind immediately tried to imagine what had happened to them. Car accident, heart attack, a fall. The images came uninvited, gruesome and detailed, and I hated myself for it. My scalp began to itch. Without thinking, my fingers dug in. I scratched until the pressure in my head eased. The nurse gave me a gown and told me a doctor would be in soon. As she stepped behind the privacy curtain, I caught a glimpse, just a glimpse, of a dark figure near the nurse's station, standing still, watching the trauma room through the glass. The curtain closed and my anxiety dipped for half a second, like my brain had temporarily lost the thread. I won't bore you with every test they ran. Blood work, imaging, waiting. More waiting. Hours passed in that bright, uncomfortable way time moves in hospitals. In the end, they told me I didn't have appendicitis. My appendix looked fine. The pain, they said, was likely the beginning of a bad stomach flu. They gave me discharge papers, a list of over-the-counter meds, and instructions on what to watch for. I was annoyed, mostly because I'd lost a night of sleep and spent hours in fear just to be told to buy Pepto-Bismol. As I walked out, I noticed something else. The trauma area was quiet now. The rushed energy had drained away, replaced by a heavy stillness. The ambulance patient wasn't there anymore. The air felt sad in the way a room feels after someone has died. And there, behind the window, was the dark figure again. The bright hospital lights seemed to disappear into it. Its shape wasn't fully solid, more like a human outline made of shadow. It turned toward me, and two small points of yellow light flickered on. Eyes, or something close enough to eyes that my body reacted like they were real. My stomach rolled. Dizziness hit hard. I turned away and kept walking, telling myself to mind my business, to get my medicine, to go home. The pain in my lower abdomen still pulsed, dull and stubborn. It actually felt worse when I sat in the car, like my body didn't like being folded. At the store, half awake and feverish, I pushed a cart down mostly empty aisles, using it like a cane. The overhead lights were too bright. Everything smelled like plastic and cleaning solution. And in the far edge of my vision, I saw it again. A figure of darkness, not fully there, occupying the end of an aisle like a stain the world couldn't scrub out. My grip tightened on the cart handle. The metal felt cold. I made sudden turns, awkward and sharp, trying to put distance between me and whatever my mind insisted was following. Each move made my stomach ache. Each time I changed aisles, the figure was there again, as if it didn't need to walk. It simply appeared in whatever space I wasn't looking at directly. That's when Laura's old words came back to me, clear enough to make my throat tighten. Shadow man. Stalking. Always there. The last time we spoke, she'd been curled into a ball, shaking, mumbling about being hunted. At the time, I'd assumed it was drugs, paranoia, excuses. I'd been too angry to consider any other possibility. As I scanned my items at self-checkout, my mind wandered to Laura despite myself. I wondered where she was now. The last I'd heard, through family gossip filtered down to me, she'd gone to rehab and was working toward a nursing degree. That had been about a year ago, around the time she visited Mom in hospice. Maybe Mom kept things quiet on purpose. Maybe she'd wanted peace more than she wanted details. Then I felt it. It's standing to my left, not a vague feeling, not a trick of peripheral vision. I turned my head. The shadow figure stood beside me, close enough that if it were solid, I could have reached out and touched a sleeve. Its eyes glowed yellow in the bright store lighting, as if the light couldn't wash them out. People moved past it without slowing. No, worse. They walked through it, straight through the darkness like it wasn't there at all. My mouth went dry. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I tried to build a rational explanation, tried to force my thoughts into a shape that fit reality. Stress, grief, lack of sleep, fever, anxiety. All the words doctors use when they don't know what else to say. But none of those words could explain seeing strangers pass through a person-shaped shadow. The self-checkout machine beeped at me. Ding, ding. A message flashed on the screen. Continue transaction? The ordinary annoyance of that prompt gave me just enough of a foothold to move again. I tapped the screen, finished paying, and left as fast as I could without running. On the drive home, the figure didn't appear. I tried to be grateful for that. I tried to treat it like mercy. It was around 8:30 in the morning when I pulled into the driveway of the single-story house I'd grown up in. The house that was mine now because everyone else was gone. The siding was faded blue with white trim. The porch was small concrete, cracked in places from years of settling. The front plants looked dry and desperate in the late summer heat. I unlocked the door and stepped into a living room that still didn't feel like mine. A couch, boxes stacked with Mom's belongings, the slow, painful beginning of packing away a life. Even though Mom had been in hospice for a year before she died, the house felt emptier now. Her absence wasn't new, but the finality of it was. There was no, maybe she'll come home. No hope left to pretend with. I'd installed blackout curtains in my bedroom for sleepless days like this. As I walked past the front window, I caught a glimpse of a man standing across the street. He wore a wrinkled gray suit. His back was toward me. He lifted an arm and tugged at his sleeve like he was adjusting a cuff. The itch in my scalp sparked again, sharp and demanding. My hands trembled with the urge to scratch deep enough to reach calm. I forced myself to pull the curtain shut before I could stare too long. I fell into a sleep without dreams. When I woke hours later, it was mid-afternoon, and my mouth felt like sandpaper. My skin was damp with sweat. A fever had settled in while I slept, turning the air in the room thick and sour. A soft knocking echoed through the house. Knock, knock. I lay still for a moment, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. Then it came again. My joints complained as I pushed myself up. Pain boomed in my abdomen, sharper now as if something inside me had been getting worse while I slept. I staggered out of my room toward the front of the house, thinking only, water, medicine, then back to bed. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked wrong, too pale, eyes too glassy. The knocking continued. Then a sudden tearing pain hit my midsection. It felt like something inside me split. My vision started to darken at the edges, curling inward like burned paper. The hallway tilted. I tried to grab the wall, but my hand missed. And in that last clear second before I fell, I saw the front door opening. Not from the outside. From inside the house, a well-dressed figure of shadow stood there, holding the door as if it belonged to him. The darkness of his shape drank in the daylight. Those yellow eyes flickered once, steady and calm. The floor rose up and met my face. A harsh static filled my ears, blending with the scream of a woman's voice. Familiar, desperate, close. Something in my body finally failed me. Some mechanical piece snapping or stalling. And for the first time in what felt like my whole life, I didn't feel anxiety. I felt peace. I sank. Not into darkness exactly, but into an endless space that stretched in every direction. Points of light flickered around me like stars, but they moved in patterns, repeating in a way that scratched at the same part of my brain that loved rituals. The patterns were beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like a song that could either soothe you or pull you under. One star moved closer, steering around the others like it had a destination. Like it had chosen me, it grew warmer, brighter, until it filled my vision. And then I was standing beneath a streetlight outside my childhood home. The circle of light around the lamp felt solid, safe, like a boundary. Beyond it was nothing but dark. The shadow figure stood at the front door, waiting. "Where am I?" I called out, and my voice echoed like I was shouting inside a tunnel. The figure didn't answer. It simply watched, completely still. "Don't ignore me," I said, anger rising because fear had nowhere else to go. I stepped toward it. "Do not deny me my moment of absolution." I don't know why I used that word. It just came out, like my mouth was trying to give meaning to something it couldn't understand. I tried to step out of the streetlight circle. The shadow figure raised one hand, wispy, thin, a gesture that meant stop. My feet stopped. Not because I chose to. Because they obeyed. The figure moved through the dark with impossible speed and reached me in seconds. Up close, the outline shifted. For a moment, I could almost see a man in a well-dressed suit, a vague kindness in the shape, as if it were trying to look familiar on purpose. Then it placed a hand on my shoulder and pulled me out of the light. Whatever comforting illusion it had made dropped away. I was led back into the empty space. Memories played around me, scenes from my life floating like screens. Dad's face, Mom's hands, Laura's laugh from before everything went bad, and my own moments of weakness, scratching, repeating, obeying thoughts I hated. We drifted deeper, past strange shapes in the dark, Creatures that looked built from mismatched animals and human parts, stitched together in ways that made my stomach turn. Then the shadow figure stopped. I felt my feet touch something that wasn't visible but held my weight. The figure stood ahead of me, then stepped back into the darkness and left me there, alone. The nightmare beings moved closer. Their presence was heavy, like pressure on my chest. The closest one had the face of a dirt-covered man and arms too long, like a monkey's, its elbows twisted wrong. It scratched at patches of fur sewn into its body, frantic and obsessive, digging until thick blood oozed out. It didn't stop. It moved to a new spot, scratched until it bled, then another like it was trapped inside its own compulsion. As I watched, the itch returned on my scalp, sudden and sharp, like a hook sinking in. The urge to scratch flooded me, strong enough to make my hands twitch. I clenched my fists and tried to resist, terrified of becoming like it. It groaned, not like an animal, not like a man, but like something that had been hurting for so long it no longer remembered how to speak. I stepped backward, shaking. Something hard pressed into my back. I turned and saw another creature behind me, so close I could smell it. Wet fur, old blood, something sour. It had a woman's face sewn onto the body of a bear. Thin deer legs dragged uselessly behind it. Human-shaped arms pulled its heavy body forward, and between each crawl it raked sharp bird-like talons across its own skin in neat, parallel lines. Over and over, the same pattern, as if the pattern mattered more than the pain. A guttural crying poured out of it, raw and endless. My legs gave out and I hit the ground. I covered my eyes and rocked, trying to shut it all out, trying to keep my mind from grabbing onto the patterns and turning them into rules I'd have to follow forever. No, I shouted into my hands. No, 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 enough. Enough. The air shifted. When I looked up, the monsters were gone. My anxiety was quiet, like someone had turned off a screaming radio. 3 figures stood around me. My parents were there, healthy, solid, younger than they'd been at the end. Mom's hair looked the way it used to before sickness. Dad's face looked like the last time I remember him truly alive. The shadow figures stood in front of us, still and silent. No one spoke. No words were needed. My parents leaned down and pulled me into an embrace. Real warmth, real arms, the kind of comfort I'd been starving for without admitting it. I sobbed so hard I could barely breathe. If a god had reached down and tried to pull me out of that moment, I think I would have fought him. And then, slowly, the figures faded like mist. The warmth left. The light dimmed. I lost consciousness again. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. I had tubes in my arm. My throat felt raw. My abdomen hurt in a deep, heavy way that told me something serious had happened. A nurse noticed I was awake and called for someone. Turns out, I did have appendicitis. Not the mild kind, not the go-home-with-medicine kind. The kind that can kill you if it ruptures. The kind that almost did. If Laura hadn't found me, I would have died. And she did find me. That scream I heard while I was falling, the familiar voice, that was her. She'd come to the house. Maybe to check on me. Maybe because something in her wouldn't let her stay away after Mom died. I still don't know what made her come that day, but I know what would have happened if she hadn't. When I came out of surgery, she was in the room, asleep in a chair beside my bed. For a second, I thought she was a hallucination too, my brain trying to comfort itself. Then I managed to say her name, Laura. Her eyes snapped open. She looked at me like she couldn't decide if she wanted to laugh or cry. And then she was standing over me, hugging me carefully around the tubes, sobbing into my shoulder. She immediately started talking about suing the hospital for medical neglect. She was furious, words spilling out fast, but I couldn't focus on any of that. All I could think was, she's here, and she's real, and she's my sister. She did get that nursing degree. She told me between sniffles that one of her closest co-workers was the lobby nurse from the night before. Her co-worker knew the history between us and probably broke rules by telling Laura I'd been in the ER, that I'd listed myself as my emergency contact. Laura said she'd heard that and felt sick, like it confirmed her worst fear, that if something happened to me, no one would even know who to call. She didn't say it to guilt me. She said it like it hurt her, and I didn't care about the rule breaking. I cared that it saved my life. We talked for hours until her shift started. We talked about everything that had happened since our last fight. I apologized for what I'd said, for not reaching out, for letting anger become more important than having my sister. She apologized too, for stealing, for lying, for leaving, for the ways she'd hurt Mom and me. None of it was magically fixed in one afternoon, but something cracked open that had been sealed for years. I had my sister back. After that, my compulsions eased. Not gone, but quieter. They still flare up every few days. An itch, a counting urge, a pattern my brain tries to force, but they don't control my whole day anymore. Maybe it's because I brushed against death and came back. Or maybe it's because I'm not alone now. Still, I can't pretend I forgot what I saw. Those creatures in that endless space felt like exaggerated versions of me, of my brain, like my compulsions made flesh, tortured and endless. A warning of what it could become if I gave in completely. I never want to be near them again. Laura and I don't see the shadow man around us the way we used to. I told her everything I experienced. She went quiet, then admitted she'd had her own experience too. She said she'd seen him sometimes at work, not stalking her, not threatening her, just present. Always around when someone was close to the edge, never interfering, never comforting, just there. Since then, I've caught glimpses too. Not often, just in places where life feels thin, near a car crash on the side of the road. Standing outside the nursing home down the street, once, far away, near the entrance of the hospital parking lot, like he was waiting for someone else. I don't think he's evil. I think he's a kind of transport, a witness, a doorway that looks like a man because our minds need shapes to hold on to. Laura and I both understand that one day we'll see him again for real, not in glimpses. And when that day comes, there will be nothing to bargain with, nothing to ritual away, nothing to scratch out of our skin. My expiration date will come, but I don't think I'll be scared the second time around. Story 3. Johnny made a lot of promises in his life. Promises to his family, promises to girls, promises to himself. He broke most of them, and he always knew he would. That was normal. People break promises all the time. Johnny didn't think he was special. What he didn't expect was that none of the promises would matter at all. He didn't know yet, didn't understand it, not really, that every promise he'd ever made was light as smoke compared to the one promise that never broke. The only promise that stayed true. Pain. More and more and more until it filled your mouth and throat. Until it was the only taste you knew. Until it made you drunk in a way alcohol could never manage because you couldn't sleep it off. You couldn't sober up from it. It soaked into you and became you. He remembered saying goodbye to his father, trying to stand tall like a man, even though he still felt like a kid. He remembered his older brother clapping him on the back, making jokes that didn't land. He remembered his little sisters crying and then pretending not to cry, wiping their cheeks fast so he wouldn't see. It felt like the last clean moment of his life, the last moment where the world still had edges that made sense, the last time he was Johnny in the simple way. Then the bus took him, then he was made a Marine. Then he was sent into the thick ancient green of Vietnam where the air itself felt alive and hungry, and where men lost their minds the way they lost blood, quickly and in shocking amounts. He learned new sounds there. Artillery, gunfire, the wet, ripping noise bullets make when they hit flesh. The roar of napalm, the hiss of chemicals sprayed into leaves and branches to kill the jungle so it couldn't hide anyone anymore. Fire raining down from above. Villages burning, people screaming, and then not screaming. It wasn't just war. War was too clean a word. It was violation. The rules got ripped out of everyone. Every side, every man, every woman, every child. Something in all of them got pulled apart. Fear turned people into animals. Power turned them into worse animals. Johnny saw things that didn't fit into any story he'd heard back home. He saw bodies open up like meat at a butcher shop. He saw guts spill into the dirt. He saw faces change by explosions into masks nobody would recognize. He saw eyes that stayed open, even when the person behind them was gone. And he understood, in a way that made him sick, that souls can be butchered too. Not like religion talks about it, not like some invisible thing floating up to heaven or down to hell. He meant something simpler and uglier. The part of a person that says, I am human, can be cut up the same way the body can. You can watch it happen, right there in their expression, right there in how they stop reacting. Most of it happened at night. The jungle at night was a different planet. Everything was damp and loud and alive. You could hear insects screaming, frogs calling, branches creaking, the wet slap of boots in mud, and then, threaded through all that, the sounds that really mattered. Distant gunfire, someone shouting, a sudden scream, and then silence. Nowhere was safe. Not the open spaces, not the hidden ones, not sleeping, not waking. Even breathing felt loud. The darkness didn't protect you. It only hid what was coming. Johnny thought he had learned the full shape of horror. Then one day, after another search and destroy mission, after another village left smoldering behind them, his squad mate Taylor offered him a tab of LSD. Taylor called it pure sunshine. They were marching through the wreckage of a village that still had smoke drifting up from collapsed roofs. The air smelled like burned wood and burned food and something else Johnny didn't want to name. The mission had been orders. That's what they always called it. Orders. Like that word could wash blood off your hands. Taylor walked beside him like they were taking a casual hike. Sakam, Taylor said, holding out the tab between his fingers. Pure sunshine, like a stamp, like something you could lick and forget. He should have refused. He almost did. Before the war, Johnny had never even touched a cigarette. He'd had one beer once with his grandpa when he was a kid, and he hadn't even finished it. It tasted like bread someone had vomited back up into a bottle. The war had changed that. He'd learned how to drink fast and hard. He'd tried opium. He'd tried heroin. He'd gotten used to weed, the cheap, stinking kind that made the world feel softer for an hour. But he hadn't done LSD. Not yet. Part of it was fear. Part of it was pride. LSD was for hippies in his mind. The people back home who protested and called soldiers murderers. The people he'd been taught to hate before he ever saw a jungle. Taylor kept watching him, smiling. You'll dig it, man, Taylor said, winking in that vulgar way Taylor had, like everything was either a joke or a dare. Trust me. I don't know, Johnny said. I don't want my brain scrambled. Taylor laughed. You mean no more than it already is? Fuck you, Johnny muttered. Not till we're back at post and cuddled and such, Taylor said, grinning. Till then, just give it a taste. Don't be such a skirt. You ain't a Nance, are you, Ellison? They stopped walking for a beat. Smoke drifted through the burned-out huts around them. Somewhere far off, a helicopter thudded through the sky. Johnny stared at Taylor, and despite everything, a small smile pulled at his mouth. Fuck you, he said again, flatter this time. Then he reached out, took the tab, and pinched it between two fingers. He held it up, studying it like he could see the future in it. Taylor raised his eyebrows. Changing your mind, Johnny said something ugly about Taylor's sister and mother, trying to make it sound like he wasn't nervous. Then he placed the tab on his tongue. It began to melt immediately. Let it melt, Taylor said. That's how it gets in, through your spit. And then, nothing. No rush, no colors, no strange thoughts, no shift in the air. The tab dissolved and the world stayed the same ugly world. They kept marching. Johnny felt almost disappointed, which made him angry at himself. Like he'd been hoping for an escape and didn't want to admit it. Taylor frowned. Damn, man. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Should have worked. Let's just get back to base camp. And they did. Hours later, in the black middle of the night, everything exploded. An ambush hit their base camp like the jungle itself had decided to open its mouth and bite down. Mortar fire fell out of the sky. The first blasts were bright and loud enough to steal the breath from your lungs. Men came out of tents half asleep and instantly turned into running targets. Some died before they fully understood they were awake. Johnny scrambled up with the rest, grabbing his rifle, his training snapping into place like muscle memory. He was terrified, but he wasn't new anymore. His body knew how to move under fire. He found cover. He fired back. He did what he was supposed to do. Then he saw something he couldn't explain. Usually you didn't see the enemy clearly. You saw flashes, shadows, movement. Then you saw bodies after it was done, if you were unlucky enough to walk up close. But this time, under the firelight and muzzle flashes, he saw them. He saw the Viet Cong. And they were flying. Not jumping, not climbing, flying high above the trees against the deep blue night. Great wings spread from their backs. Bat wings, huge and dark and stretched wide. They flapped through smoke and fire like the laws of the world didn't apply to them. Tracer rounds tore through the air and punched holes in the wings. And when bullets found flesh, blood rained down warm and sticky. Johnny felt it hit his face. Blood and heat. He couldn't make his brain accept what his eyes were reporting. What the hell is this? What the hell is happening? Even in panic, he raised his rifle and fired upward. Training took over because thinking would have made him freeze. He hit one of the flying figures dead center. The body split apart in a disgusting, messy way, like something torn in half by a giant hand. Pieces of it fell down through the branches and crashed onto him. Warm chunks, wet splatter, the smell of iron. Then the whole scene went black. Johnny woke up in his bunk. Daylight. Calm, men talking like it was any other morning. Someone laughing. Someone complaining about food. For a moment, he just lay there, sweating, heart racing, confused by the normal sounds. A dream, he told himself. Just a nightmare. It had to be. But the memory clung to him like grime. Taylor was sitting on his own cot nearby, reading a book with a worn cover. Johnny recognized the title when he squinted. Ozma of Oz. Taylor had once said it was a childhood favorite someone mailed to him. His parents, maybe. His sister, Johnny, couldn't remember. Johnny sat up fast. What about last night, he demanded. The ambush, the attack. Did you see them? The flying, those bat wing. There was worry there, but also amusement. Like he didn't want to make it worse by taking it too seriously. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, Taylor said. You need to wind down, man. Johnny swallowed and forced a nod. Yeah, he said. Yeah, you're right. It was probably just the acid you gave me. Taylor's face shifted. Real confusion. Real concern. What? Johnny felt irritation flare because Taylor's act was too clean. The tab, Johnny said. You gave me acid while we were walking through that burned village. The camp felt quieter all at once, though Johnny only noticed it in a distant way, like his mind was focused through a tunnel. Taylor finally spoke, slow and careful. Dude, I never gave you any acid. I haven't touched that shit since I got here. Not really my scene. We've got a job to do. Johnny's stomach rolled. The words didn't land like a normal lie. They landed like a trap door opening under his feet. Vertigo spread through him. He felt his insides churn, like his body was trying to process something poisonous. The world tilted. For a second, he thought he was going to throw up. He leaned forward with his head bowed, not in prayer, but in pure sickness. Taylor's hand touched his shoulder. Cool down, my friend. It ran down his scalp and neck, soothing for a second, like relief. It felt like mercy in a place that didn't have mercy. Johnny lifted his head to thank him, and suddenly they weren't in camp anymore. They were marching through the jungle again, on patrol. The shift was so smooth it made his mind skip, like someone had cut a few frames out of a film reel. One moment daylight in camp, the next, The green wall of the jungle and sweat on his skin and insects whining in the air. Taylor was beside him, walking like nothing happened. Johnny's mouth opened, but the words tangled in his throat. He was too confused to even panic properly. His brain kept trying to pick which reality was real and couldn't hold on to either long enough to decide. Still, he felt grateful. The cold liquid had helped. He'd been burning up. Everything in that country burned. Heat, fear, anger, shame. He laughed suddenly because the alternative was screaming. He started talking to Taylor like everything was fine, like the war was going great, like they were doing what they were supposed to do, like High Command was proud, like people back home were cheering. This is my purpose, Johnny told himself. This jungle is mine. I'm meant to be here. The thought felt bright, clean, almost holy. Taylor laughed with him and slapped his shoulder. Then Taylor's smile faded. He looked straight into Johnny's face. "No," Taylor said quietly. "That wasn't water I poured on you." Johnny stopped walking in the jungle. Stopping was wrong. Stopping meant you were dead. You moved because movement was life. Even when you wanted to collapse, you moved. But Taylor held him in place without touching him, just with his voice. "What do you mean?" Johnny asked. Taylor's expression shifted into something unreadable. "I just poured more LSD all over your head," Taylor said. "Bathed it. Baptized you." Johnny's heart hammered. "What the fuck are you talking about?" Taylor kept going like he enjoyed the rhythm of his own words. "There were other things in it, too," he said. "Tears of fallen angels, alien stuff, freaky." Johnny tried to speak, tried to argue, tried to tell him he couldn't just... And then the jungle erupted again. Gunfire snapped from multiple directions. Leaves tore apart. Dirt kicked up. The sound was sudden and complete, like the world had been waiting for the exact moment Johnny's attention broke. The Marines dropped for cover, firing into trees, shouting, trying to spot movement. Johnny's body did what it had learned to do even while his mind spun like a wheel on ice. They raked the tree line with bullets, and then something impossible happened. The trees didn't just spit back lead. They belched blood. Screams followed, wet, gurgling screams, then smoke and silence like the enemy had retreated. Johnny and Taylor rose cautiously and moved toward the spot where the blood was thickest. They pushed through branches and leaves stained red. And they found a man. He was torn up by gunfire, but that wasn't the worst part. His body wasn't still. His ripped open organs and shredded meat were moving like a nest of insects inside him, rippling, shuddering, vibrating. "What the fuck?" Johnny whispered. Taylor didn't answer. The man's entrails began to rise out of him, stretching upward in long, wet coils like snakes made of raw flesh. They lifted and swayed as if mesmerized by music nobody else could hear. They glistened, slick with hot blood that steamed in the jungle shade. They hissed, but not like normal snakes. The sound was wrong, like choking, like children trying to scream through throats full of vomit, like voices trapped in meat. The flesh snakes coiled higher, then they began to close in on Johnny and Taylor. Johnny screamed. He couldn't stop. Terror poured out of him as sound. Taylor laughed. Not nervous laughter. Not "we're going to die" laughter. Maniac laughter like he was watching a comedy. Then Taylor stopped laughing and raised a pistol. An old Luger, the kind Johnny had only seen in pictures. Taylor fired. The man they'd found dropped, jerking and twisting in a dancer's spiral. And then the world shifted again so violently it made Johnny's brain feel like it tore. Snow-white plains, cold air that burned the lungs. The jungle was gone. Johnny stood in a different war, wearing different clothes, surrounded by men moving like ghosts across a Russian winter. The words in his head changed too. The thoughts became different thoughts, full of hatred and certainty and propaganda that tasted like metal. He laughed with Taylor, only now Taylor wasn't a Marine beside him. Taylor was a fellow soldier in a different uniform, in a different ideology. in a different nightmare that still felt familiar because it was still killing. The dead man in the snow looked ridiculous, Johnny's mind told him, and he believed it with a certainty that wasn't his. Then, the horizon filled with red uniforms. The Red Army charged, the air filled with screams and gunfire, and the shining flash of knives. The knives came in close. The world became blades, thrusting, cutting, tearing. A whole universe of sharp metal drinking blood. Johnny felt himself being butchered, and it should have ended there. But it didn't. It never ended. The pain promise kept going. More and more and more. And through it all, he could still hear Taylor's voice somewhere, as if Taylor existed outside the scene changes, outside the eras, outside the wars. Johnny whirled, furious, and shouted at him to shut up. If Johnny could hear him, the enemy could too. Whoever the enemy was now. It kept changing. It didn't matter. It was always the same thing wearing different faces. Then the cold battlefield dissolved again. Now there was metal beneath his hands. A ship, a fortress in space, strange instruments, strange lights, a window showing a planet below like a blue-green marble waiting to be cracked open. Johnny wasn't Johnny anymore. He was Commander Ellison, highly decorated, feared, worshipped by ranks of men who called his name like prayer. Taylor was there too. First Gunner Taylor, smiling like he always did, hands on levers that controlled weapons that could burn a world. Ellison gave the order for orbital bombardment. Taylor pulled the levers. Plasma and nuclear fire rained down. Multicolored light bloomed across the planet's surface, like flowers made of destruction. Johnny watched an entire world catch flame, and he thought it was beautiful. Then cold water hit the back of his head. Sudden, real. He blinked hard. He was back in Vietnam again, standing near the smoldering ruins of the village from earlier. The fire crackled. Smoke drifted. The wind carried faint screams that sounded far away, like they belonged to another place, another time. Taylor was beside him, wiping his hands casually like he'd just finished something messy. "Kalo's got a stick where it ain't pretty," Taylor said. "See, come on, Ellison." Johnny nodded slowly, like his neck was full of sand. He took one last look at the village, then he turned to go with Taylor. "Yeah," Johnny said. "Yeah, I guess you're right." He hesitated, his thoughts slipping. "You sure you weren't saying something?" Taylor frowned, puzzled. "Huh? What do you mean?" "I haven't said hardly anything. Not since we left base camp." Fire crackled. Smoke curled up into the sky. Johnny stared at Taylor's face, trying to find the seam where the lie was stitched, trying to decide whether Taylor was messing with him, whether the acid was real, whether anything was real. The jungle was quiet in that watchful way it got sometimes, when even insects seemed to hold their breath. "You sure?" Johnny asked. Taylor nodded slowly, eyes unblinking. "Yeah, man." "Why? What's up?" Johnny shook his head as if he could clear it like water from his ears. "It's nothing," he said. "You're right. Let's go back." They started marching. The burned village behind them crackled as the wind fed the fire. The screaming had stopped for the moment, but Johnny knew deep down it would come back. It always came back, in one form or another. As they walked, Taylor leaned closer and whispered like he was sharing a secret. "Got something to show you once we're back," Taylor said, smiling. And Johnny felt, with sudden certainty, that whatever Taylor was about to show him would hurt. Story 4. I used to work night security at a multi-story car park on the edge of town. It was the kind of job people imagine is easy money, because nothing ever happens. And most nights that was true. After 11 p.m., it was just me, the security booth, the camera monitors, and row after row of parked cars sitting under fluorescent lights that never stopped buzzing. Those lights had a bad habit of flickering at random. Not enough to plunge anything into total darkness, just enough to make the place feel tired and off. The concrete always looked damp, even when it was dry. The corners always looked darker than they should. And when the wind came through the open sides of the structure, It made a sound that could almost be mistaken for distant voices if you weren't careful. There were 5 levels in that car park. Everybody in town knew that, mostly because it was the only big car park for miles, and it sat right near the main road like a concrete stack of shelves. 5 levels, with a ramp that curled up through the middle. The layout was simple, which was part of why the job was so repetitive. Every hour I did the same rounds, level 1 to level 5. Always the same. I'd walk the perimeter, glance between cars, check stairwells, make sure the emergency exits weren't propped open. I'd shine my torch into the spots cameras didn't cover well. I'd listen to the echo of my own footsteps, and I'd go back down again. Most nights, the only movement I saw was my own reflection in a car window. Sometimes a late shopper would come back for their vehicle. Sometimes a couple of teenagers would cut through the stairwell because they thought it was funny to hang around a place that felt creepy after midnight. But by 2 a.m., it was usually dead quiet. Quiet enough that you start noticing patterns without meaning to. The way a certain light always flickers twice, then steadies. The way one of the cameras lags half a second when you switch to it. The way the air smells on level 3 compared to level 5. You don't notice these things because you're observant. You notice them because there's nothing else to notice. That's why when something finally did change, it hit me immediately. It was around 2:40 a.m., I remember the time, because I just looked at the clock, thinking about how slowly the last stretch of the night always went. The early hours are the worst. Midnight to 1 a.m. still feels like the night has energy. By 2:40, everything feels drained. I was in the security booth, leaning back in my chair with a lukewarm coffee that tasted like it had been sitting too long. The monitors were lined up in front of me, each one showing a different angle. Entrances, stairwells, pay stations, ramps. Most of them were still images, empty concrete, empty parking bays. Then I saw movement on camera 6. Camera 6 covered the ramp between level 4 and level 5. It was positioned just right to catch headlights as they came up, and taillights as they went down. It was one of the cameras I looked at without thinking, because it was always the same, nothing but a strip of ramp and the concrete wall beside it. This time, there was a car. It was driving upward, slow and steady, headlights on low beam. The lights washed across the wall as it climbed, and the tires made that faint, soft sound on concrete that you can almost feel more than hear. At first, I didn't think much of it. Cars came in late sometimes. People worked odd shifts. People forgot where they parked and circled around like they were trying to jog their memory. It wasn't unusual, was what happened next. The car didn't stop. Normally, once a car reached level 5, it would swing out of the ramp and disappear from that camera's view. Level 5 was the top. The ramp ended there. There was nowhere else to go unless you turned around. But on camera 6, the car kept climbing. Its headlights kept moving up the ramp, rising past the point where level 5 should have flattened out, past where the concrete curve should have ended. The light stretched upward into an area that, as far as I knew, didn't exist. Beyond that point on the screen was darkness. Not the normal kind of darkness you get at the edges of a camera's range, where you can still make out shapes. This looked deeper, like the camera was aimed into a space that didn't have lights at all. I leaned forward without realizing it. My coffee sat forgotten beside me. The car's headlights climbed higher, and the beams started catching dust in the air like pale smoke. The vehicle moved slowly, almost carefully, as if the driver was watching for something. Then it vanished into that darkness. Just swallowed by it, the ramp on the monitor stayed empty after that. No reverse lights, no tail lights coming back down. No sign the car had turned around. My first thought was that the camera was glitching. Cameras do that. They freeze. They loop. They skip. Sometimes you get weird compression artifacts that make motion look wrong. Sometimes the angle makes distances hard to judge. It's easy to convince yourself you saw something you didn't when you've been staring at screens for hours. So I did the sensible thing. I rewound the footage. I watched it again from the moment the car entered the frame. Same thing. It climbed past where it should have stopped. I rewound again, this time slower, looking for signs of a visual error. The edges of the ramp didn't wobble. The picture didn't tear. The timestamp rolled smoothly. The headlights moved in a clean, steady line. The car went up and kept going. I felt a small knot form in my stomach, the kind you get when your brain is trying to stay calm, but your body has already decided something is wrong. I looked away from the monitor and glanced at the rest of the screens, like maybe another camera angle would show the truth. But the other ramp cameras were empty. The stairwells were empty. The entrances showed no car pulling in at that moment. Nothing matched what I was seeing. If the car had driven upward, it had to have come from level 4. That meant it had to have been in the building. But I hadn't seen it earlier, and I had just done my rounds not long before. I was sure of it. The car park had been empty enough that I'd actually noticed how empty it was. I sat there for a full minute, staring at camera 6, waiting for the car to come back down, waiting for something to make it make sense. Nothing happened, so I grabbed my torch and stood up. The torch was one of those heavy-duty ones, with a solid handle and a bright beam. I liked having it in my hand because it made me feel less exposed. Not because I expected trouble, but because walking through a huge, empty concrete building at night makes you feel small, and holding something, even a torch, makes you feel like you have some control. I stepped out of the booth and into the stairwell. The door shut behind me with a hollow clang that echoed upward. My footsteps echoed too, sharp and lonely as I started climbing. Level 1 was empty. Nothing unusual. A few cars near the entrance, probably left overnight by people who'd gone drinking in town and taken a taxi home. The air smelled faintly of exhaust and wet concrete. Level 2 was empty in a different way, the kind of empty that makes you want to speak just to prove your voice still exists. I walked the rows, shone my torch between vehicles, checked the corners, all normal. Level 3, same. The wind moved through the open sides of the car park, rattling something loose somewhere. Maybe a sign, maybe a drain cover. The sound traveled weirdly across the concrete and made it hard to tell where it came from. Level 4. I slowed down there. Level 4 always felt darker because one of the overhead lights near the center was unreliable, flickering in a pattern that made shadows seem to shift. I walked to the ramp that led to level 5. I expected to see tire marks, maybe fresh dust disturbed, maybe the faint glow of taillights above. There was nothing, no car, no movement, just the ramp curving up like it always did. I climbed it anyway. By the time I reached level 5, my grip on the torch was tight enough that my knuckles hurt. I told myself that was just adrenaline, that I was overreacting, that the car had probably turned around somewhere and I'd missed it. But the moment I stepped onto level 5, I felt it. The air was wrong, not dramatically wrong, not like stepping into a freezer, but wrong in a subtle way that made my skin tighten. It felt colder, yes, but more than that, it felt still, like the usual airflow that moved through the building had stopped on this level, like the air was holding its breath. Even my footsteps sounded different up there. The echoes didn't bounce the way they normally did. They seemed to die quickly, as if the concrete was absorbing the sound instead of throwing it back. I swept my torch beam across the parked cars. Level 5 had fewer cars, as usual, because people didn't like climbing that high unless they had to. The beam picked out glossy roofs, dusty windshields, license plates. No sign of a recently moving car, no engine heat, no open door, no person. Then I looked toward the far end of the level, toward the ramp. The ramp that should have curved into level 5 and ended, it was going up, continuing, the same concrete curve, the same guardrails, the same painted lines, rising beyond the top level as if it had always been built that way. It disappeared into darkness above, into an area where there were no lights. The fluorescent fixtures that covered level 5 didn't extend up there. The glow simply stopped, and the ramp climbed into shadow. I stood still for a long time. My torch beam reached partway up, but not far. The light hit the concrete and faded quickly, swallowed by the dark above. It felt like shining a torch into a long tunnel, except this was open air. It shouldn't have behaved like that. My brain tried to fix it. It started offering explanations the way it always does when reality shifts. Maybe there really was a sixth level and I'd forgotten. Maybe the building had been renovated. Maybe there was an employee-only deck. Maybe I was turned around and looking at something else. But I knew the building. I knew it the way you know a route you drive every day. 5 levels. That was it. It wasn't a guess. It was a fact. And in my gut, in the part of me that doesn't use words, a warning rose up so strong it made my throat tight. Don't go up there. I didn't hear it as a voice. I just felt it as certainty. The ramp wasn't just an extension of concrete. It felt like an invitation, like a mouth held open. I took one step closer, without thinking, like my body wanted to test the boundary. The air seemed colder at the base of that ramp. My torch beam trembled slightly on the concrete. The darkness above didn't look empty. It looked occupied, not by a shape, not by a person, but by something dense, like the dark itself was heavier there. I stood at the bottom and tried to listen. No engine sound, no tires, no footsteps coming down, not even the normal distant noises of the town outside. Up there, past the lights, it was silent in a way that didn't belong in a car park. My hand tightened around the torch again. I told myself I could take a few steps up, just enough to see if the ramp really continued, just enough to prove it was a trick of perspective. But the moment I imagined stepping into that dark, I imagined not stepping back out. Not because someone would grab me, not because I'd fall, but because once you went into a place that wasn't supposed to be there, the rules that got you back might not work the same. That thought scared me more than anything physical, so I turned around. I didn't run, but I walked quickly, torch held up, scanning my surroundings as I moved. I kept expecting to hear a car engine behind me, to see headlights bloom across the concrete, to feel that someone was watching from above the guardrail. But the level stayed still. When I reached the stairwell door, I went through it and let it slam shut behind me, and the echo it made sounded normal again. That alone almost made me want to laugh from relief. The normal echo meant I was back in the world that made sense. I went down the stairs fast, not skipping levels, but moving like I wanted the booth's light and monitors in front of me as soon as possible. When I got back into the security booth, I locked the door and sat down hard in the chair. My heart was still pounding, and my mouth felt dry. I stared at the monitors like they might change while I blinked. Camera 6 still showed the ramp between level 4 and level 5. On the monitor, the ramp ended where it always ended. No extra incline, no climb into darkness. Just level 5. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the whole thing, if fear had played with my perception up there. But my skin still felt cold. My hands still shook slightly when I set the torch down. I pulled out the building plans. Every security job comes with paperwork, and one of the things I'd been given when I started was a basic layout of the site. Levels, stairwells, exits, camera placement. I unfolded the plans on the small desk in the booth and traced the ramp with my finger. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, Level 4, Level 5. There was no Level 6, no extension, no upper deck, no note about construction or future expansion. The top was the top. The ramp ended at Level 5. That was the design. That was the truth on paper. I checked another document. Same. 5 levels. End of structure. I sat back and looked at the monitors again. The footage of the car should have been there in the event log. That system saved motion clips automatically. Even if the live feed had glitched, the recording usually caught something. I searched the timeline around 2:40 a.m. There was an entry. Motion detected. I clicked it. The recording showed an empty ramp. No car. No headlights. No climb into darkness. Just a few seconds of static concrete and the faint flicker of the overhead light. I watched it twice, then 3 times, feeling my stomach drop further each time. The system had registered motion, but the motion was gone. like something had happened and then been removed, not by a person deleting it, but by reality refusing to leave proof. I looked at the clock again. 2:58 a.m., 18 minutes had passed since the notification. It felt like hours. I considered calling someone, the police, my supervisor, anyone. But what would I even say? That I saw a car drive past the top floor into a level that doesn't exist? That I stood on level 5 and saw the ramp keep going, and then came back down and now the camera shows nothing? There are some sentences you can't say out loud without hearing how crazy they sound. And once you say them, you can't take them back. So I did nothing. I sat there with the plans spread out on the desk, the monitors humming, and the feeling of cold still clinging to my skin, as if I'd brought it down from above. The rest of the shift dragged by. I didn't do my full rounds again. I watched the screens constantly. I kept camera 6 on longer than I should have. Every time the light flickered, my body tensed. Every time a car passed on the road outside and its headlights flashed through the open sides of the car park, I thought it was coming back. But nothing moved in the building. No cars entered, no doors opened, no footsteps in stairwells. It was quiet in the same way it had always been quiet, except now the quiet felt like it had teeth. When my shift ended and dawn started to thin the darkness outside, I didn't feel relieved the way I normally did. I felt like I was leaving something unfinished behind me, like the building would keep doing whatever it did when no one was watching, and my only comfort was that I didn't have to be there to see it. I went home and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ramp continuing upward into darkness, smooth concrete rising into a place with no lights and no end. I imagined the car's headlights climbing higher and higher, getting smaller as they went, until they became 2 tiny dots swallowed by black. And worse than that, I imagined the driver. Not panicking, not turning around, just driving upward like they belonged there, like they'd been expected. I got up, made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and tried to laugh it off in my head. A camera glitch, exhaustion, a trick of perspective, stress playing games. But those explanations didn't stick, because the strongest memory wasn't the car or the footage. It was the feeling on level 5, the still air, the deadened echo of my footsteps, the certainty in my gut that the ramp was not simply a ramp anymore, that it was a line you weren't supposed to cross. And the most unsettling part was how normal it had looked, not cracked, not broken, not newly built. It didn't look like a supernatural thing. It looked like it had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be noticed. I didn't sleep that day. I lay in bed with my eyes open, listening to the normal daytime sounds outside, cars, distant voices, someone mowing a lawn, and I kept thinking about that car climbing past the top level into darkness. Like the building had quietly opened a door and then closed it again before anyone else could see. And I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach turn, that if I went back for another night shift, sooner or later I'd look up at that monitor again and see headlights rising where they shouldn't. And one day, curiosity would win. One day I'd take a step onto that ramp and keep going. Because the worst thing about a door that shouldn't exist is that once you've seen it, it doesn't just haunt you with fear. It haunts you with the question of what's at the top. Story 5. At first, I honestly thought my phone was acting up. It started like any normal moment. I picked it up, tapped the screen, and waited for it to unlock. Instead, I got the same message I'd never really paid attention to before because it almost never happened. Face not recognized. I tried again. Face not recognized. I adjusted the angle, moved the phone closer, then farther away. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were tired and it couldn't catch my features correctly. I tilted my head like an idiot, the way people do when they think technology will understand them better, if they physically negotiate with it. Face not recognized. I sighed and typed in my passcode. That worked, but it irritated me. I'd gotten used to the convenience. I'd gotten used to not thinking about it. Now it was forcing me to pay attention. and I didn't have the patience. I locked the phone and tried Face ID again, just to be stubborn. Face not recognized. Fine, I muttered. Whatever. It was annoying, sure, but it didn't feel like a real problem. Phones glitch. Updates break things. Cameras smudge. I told myself I'd restart it later or clean the front lens, or worst case, just turn Face ID off and deal with it like it was 2015 again. I set the phone down and tried to move on with my day. Then my bladder reminded me that life doesn't pause for minor tech issues. I had to pee badly enough that it shoved every other thought out of my head. I walked to the bathroom without thinking, flicked on the light, and stepped in front of the mirror. My heart dropped so fast it felt like my chest hollowed out. For a second, my brain refused to label what I was seeing. It was like my mind kept reaching for the familiar shape of my face and coming up empty. Like the mirror was showing me a person that didn't exist. A person my eyes couldn't connect to my name. My jaw should have dropped. It would have if I'd still had one. I had eyes, and that was basically it. Two small, beady irises staring out of a smooth, featureless surface. The eyes were mine. At least I felt like they were mine. Wide and wet with instant panic, shaking slightly as they tried to focus. Everything else was gone. My nose wasn't there. My mouth wasn't there. My lips, my teeth, my tongue, none of it. It wasn't like they'd been cut off or damaged. It was like they'd never existed. Like someone had taken a doll's head, a blank one meant to be painted later, and stuck my eyes into it. Except it wasn't plastic. It was skin. My skin had grown over my lips and nose, sealing them shut under a smooth layer. No holes, no lines, no hint of the structure that had been there 20 minutes ago. My face looked rounded and wrong, too clean, too simple, as if all the detail had been erased. My hair was gone too, not shaved, not pulled out, replaced. From my forehead up over my scalp, it was more of the same skin, stretched tight and unnatural where hair should have been. And it wasn't healthy skin. It wasn't even the normal color of me. It was gray, like something dead left in the shade. It looked dry and thin. Every time I twitched, tiny flakes loosened and drifted down like dust. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but my body did. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. A weak noise pushed out of me because I tried to scream. I tried to suck in air and shout. All that came out was a small, muffled sound, the kind you make with your mouth closed when you're trying to call through a wall. It sounded distant, like I was underwater. That was when I realized something else, something even worse. I couldn't breathe. At first I didn't notice because panic filled my lungs automatically, like my body assumed it could inhale if it needed to. But when I tried to take a real breath, there was nowhere for the air to go. No nostrils, no mouth, no opening. I stood in front of the mirror, frozen, and only then did I feel the tightness in my chest, the rising pressure, the desperate reflex to gulp air that wasn't available. My hands flew to my face. I clawed at the smooth skin where my mouth should have been. I scratched hard enough that it burned, but it didn't split the way it should have. It didn't tear open. It only flaked, leaving pale shreds under my nails, like I was scraping at dried glue. My chest contracted harder. My vision started to sharpen at the edges in that awful way it does when you're about to faint, like the world is narrowing down to a tunnel and you're being pushed through it. I stumbled backward and hit the bathroom counter. The cold edge pressed into my hip, grounding me for half a second. I tried to breathe again, harder, as if force could create an opening. Nothing. My eyes, those two stupid, terrified eyes, stayed locked on my reflection because I couldn't stop looking. The mirror was the only proof this was happening, and I hated it, and I couldn't pull away. Then the skin over the center of my face began to glow. At first, it was a faint warmth under the gray surface. Then it turned red, spreading like a bruise blooming in fast motion. The red deepened, shifted into purple, then into a bright, unnatural blue. The colors moved under the skin, as if something was shining from the inside, like LED lights trapped beneath flesh. My vision pulsed with each color change. My heartbeat was a drum in my ears, loud and thick, fighting against the growing emptiness in my lungs. Right before the lights in my eyes started to go out, I noticed the final thing, my eyelids. They began to change. Skin started growing from the top lid downward and from the bottom lid upward, slow, steady, like wax melting in reverse. It wasn't a blink. It wasn't me closing my eyes. It was my eyes being sealed shut the same way my mouth and nose had been sealed. The skin crept closer, narrowing my view of my reflection into a thin slit. I watched it happen because I had no choice. I could feel it too, an odd pulling sensation, not painful exactly, but wrong, like a tight band being drawn across my eyes. The slit of vision shrank. My reflection disappeared behind a closing seam of flesh, and then it was black. I don't know how long I lay there. Seconds, minutes. Time doesn't work right when you're terrified and suffocating. But I didn't die. I know I didn't. I'm still here. I'm still thinking. My mind is racing so fast it feels like it might tear itself apart. I can feel the bathroom floor under me, cold tile against my cheek, the hard edge of the cabinet against my shoulder. My arm is bent at a strange angle, numb in places and aching in others. I can't see anything. I can't open my eyes. All I have is darkness and the sensation of my own body, my own ruined, sealed body, still existing. That's the part that makes it worse. If I were dead, at least it would be over. But I'm not. I'm here, trapped inside myself, aware in the dark, waiting for the moment my body finally admits the truth my mind is already screaming. That there's no air coming. That there's no way out. Story 6. Friday night. One more day and this godforsaken summer camp is over. For all I know, it's already Saturday. Time works weird here. Like the place is its own little world where nothing matters except wake-up whistles and mosquito bites. I keep telling myself that if I can just fall asleep on this stiff cot they have the nerve to call a bed, I'll wake up and my parents will finally be here. I'll get in the car, slam the door, and watch the cabins shrink in the rearview mirror until the trees swallow them. I'm lying there with my eyes half closed when a whisper cuts right into my ear. Hey, Mousy, get up and come outside. He's the kind of kid who's never tired and never quiet. The kind who gets bored if everyone isn't miserable with him. He's leaning over my cot, poking my shoulder like I'm a toy he wants to wind up. I crack my eyes open and see his grin floating in the dark. Come on, he says again, softer, like he's doing me a favor. I sit up, rubbing my face. My brain is still in that half-sleep place where everything feels far away, but I know how this goes. If I don't get up now, Timmy will keep escalating until he gets a reaction. He'll flick water on me, he'll pull my blanket off, he'll do something gross and laugh when I get upset. And if I really push him, I know exactly what'll happen. Tomorrow, when I'm half asleep and not paying attention, I'll see him standing over me with a bowl of hot water, ready to dump it on my hand like some old-school prank. Timmy loves that stuff. Anything that makes someone feel stupid. So I throw my legs off the cot and stand up. Fine, I mutter. Timmy leads me outside, past the boys' cabin, down the path toward the lake. The air is cold enough to bite, and the ground feels damp through the soles of my sneakers. Somewhere deeper in the woods, something chirps, then goes quiet again like it realized we're here. Near the shore, the rest of our group is waiting. Taylor, Carter, Jesse, and Julian. They're the closest thing I have to friends here, but only because we're all assigned to Counselor Lily. It's not like we have much in common. Mostly we just survive the week together, like inmates in the same cell block. I don't hate them the way I hate Timmy, but I don't feel like I belong with them either. The truth is, I don't know who I fit in with anywhere. Sleeping in the boys' cabin makes my skin feel wrong, like I'm wearing clothes that don't belong to me. Half the guys in there act like it's the funniest thing on earth that my hair goes past my ears. They call me Mousy because they think it's cute to make me small. They do the same little jokes, over and over, until you can't tell if they're trying to be funny or trying to punish you for being different. But the girls' cabin doesn't sound like some safe paradise either. It's not like there's a door marked, "People like you go here." It's just 2 boxes, and you're supposed to fit in one of them without complaint. So I stick with whoever I'm assigned to and keep my mouth shut, because being alone would make me stand out even more. Timmy crouches by a pile of sticks and gets a little fire going, feeding it like he's done this 100 times. Soon the flames are licking up, and everybody shifts closer for warmth. The lake is a dark sheet behind us, barely moving. Above it, the sky is clear, packed with stars. The reflection is so pretty, it almost makes me angry, like the place is trying to trick me into thinking I'll miss it. Timmy claps his hands once, loud, like he's calling a meeting. "Okay," he says, voice full of excitement. "One last hurrah before camp ends tomorrow. We're doing a scary story contest." Taylor groans like she already regrets following him out here, but she doesn't leave. Timmy continues, grinning wider. "Here's the prize. The person with the least scary story has to do anything the person with the scariest story says." I feel my stomach drop. There it is. That's why he dragged us out here. Not for fun, not for bonding, for leverage. He looks straight at me. Mousy goes first. I open my mouth to protest, but nothing comes out fast enough. He adds, like he's being generous, "You're already scary enough as it is. I know you got a good story in you." The group laughs. Not loud, but enough. Enough to make my ears burn. I know exactly why he's making me go first. If I go first, I have no idea what the tone is. I don't know if we're doing real scary stories or dumb kid stuff. I'm the test run, the sacrificial guinea pig. The one who messes up so Timmy can turn it into a dare. I swallow hard and force myself to talk. My voice is small, especially outdoors at night, surrounded by people who are waiting for me to be embarrassing. Okay, I start. This isn't like a ghost story. I push through it anyway. I tell them about the time my neighbor's wiener dog bit me, how it clamped onto my leg and wouldn't let go, how I screamed and fell and felt teeth ripping at me, how it bled all night, and my parents didn't believe it was that bad until they saw my sheets the next morning. It's not scary in a campfire way, no monster, no killer, just a tiny dog and the feeling of being trapped and helpless and not taken seriously. To me, it was terrifying. Saying it out loud makes it sound stupid. When I finish, Timmy makes a loud, disappointed sound. "That's your scary story? A sausage dog?" Julian snorts. Carter laughs. Taylor smirks. Jessie doesn't laugh, but she looks uncomfortable, like she doesn't know where to put her eyes. Jessie goes next. She's the only one here who comes close to my level of timid. Her shoulders curl inward when she talks, like she's trying to make herself smaller. She tells us about the girls' cabin and the deer head mounted on the wall. She says when she tries to sleep, she can feel it staring at her, like the glass eyes are following her across the room. She swears she's seen it blink, just once, and after that she couldn't stop looking at it. That one actually gets to me a little, not because I believe the deer head is alive, but because I know that feeling, the feeling of being watched when you're trying to rest, the feeling of not being safe in a place you're supposed to sleep. Carter goes next. He says there's a satanic cult in his hometown. Every Friday night at 3 a.m., they sacrifice a human to Lucifer. He says he knows it's true because his cousin's friend's brother saw it once and ran away before they could catch him. It sounds like something he heard in church and decided to repeat because he thinks it makes him sound tough. If I had to guess, his pastor describes the local gay bar exactly like that. Taylor doesn't even really tell a story. She just leans forward and turns her eyelids inside out. It works. All of us shriek, even me. It's disgusting and horrifying in a way that's impossible to ignore. She laughs like she's won already. Then Julian goes. He claims he summoned Bloody Mary in his bathroom mirror at home, and she actually appeared. He says she came crawling out of the glass like a spider, and he fought her off with his dad's gun. Timmy makes a show of looking impressed. "Wow," he says, dripping sarcasm. Then it's Timmy's turn, and the whole mood shifts, because everybody knows Timmy likes attention the way some people like oxygen. He reaches into his backpack and pulls out a flashlight. He clicks it on and aims it under his chin, throwing shadows up his face. This, he announces, voice low and theatrical, is the true story about the dark and disturbing past of this very place, Camp Greenwood. I roll my eyes, but quietly. Part of me is annoyed, but another part of me feels that little involuntary prickle of curiosity. He's good at setting a scene. I'll give him that. Decades ago, Timmy says, this place was called Camp Stardust, named after Stardust Lake, which is said to shine like the night sky. He pauses like he expects applause. Then he looks directly at me and smiles. Back then, there was one kid at camp who wore a mask all summer long, he continues. It covered his whole head. The front was the rubber face of a wrinkly green monster with sharp yellow teeth. Everyone called him Mask Kid. He shifts closer to me on purpose, and I shuffle away without thinking. My spine feels tight, like my body is trying to make space. Mask Kid was into a lot of other weird and disturbing things, Timmy says, leaning into the flashlight beam. He'd sit alone all day. Then he'd get up and kill any animals he found in the forest. Kayla makes a noise like she's impressed. Julian's eyes are wide, loving it. Carter stares into the fire like he's trying to imagine it. Timmy stands up and paces a little, enjoying the spotlight. Everyone made fun of Mask Kid, he says. The usual stuff. Throwing rocks at him, taking his money, calling him names. But one day, someone decided to tear his mask off. And underneath, he makes a dramatic face. His head was misshapen, his teeth were crooked, his nose was twisted, his eyes were crossed. He looks around to see if the story landed. I feel a twisted kind of relief that he didn't say it was my face under the mask. The thought flashes through my mind anyway, unwanted. They threw his mask around, Timmy continues. Played keep away with it, while he cried and ran between them trying to get it back. Timmy points toward the dark shape of the tool shed behind the cabins. You can barely see it in the starlight. That, he says, was the final straw. He reaches into his back pocket slowly and pulls something out. A box cutter. Julian, Carter, and Jesse gasp. Taylor laughs like it's hilarious. My throat goes tight. The little blade catches a flicker of firelight. Timmy holds it up like a trophy. That night, Mask Kid broke into the tool shed and found the perfect weapon. He starts describing it in sick detail, how Mask Kid snuck into every cabin after the lights went out, how he slit throats, cut open stomachs, and for the kids who played keep away with his mask, he cut off fingers, arms, legs. He says Mask Kid roasted the remains over the fire. He keeps going, piling gore on top of gore until it stops being scary and becomes ridiculous. My mind starts drifting, not because I'm calm, but because the details get too much and my brain tries to protect itself by checking out. I catch myself thinking something stupid like, how sharp is that box cutter anyway? Then Timmy shifts into the next day part. When morning came and the parents arrived, he says they found all their kids murdered. Mask Kid was the only survivor, so they knew it was him. Timmy stands and starts walking toward the dock, and the rest of us follow like we're being pulled. The wood of the dock creaks under our feet. The lake is ink black. I can see our reflections only faintly, warped by small ripples. Timmy stops at the edge and turns back to us. The parents chased Mask Kid, he says, and cornered him right here, this very spot. He points down at the water like he can see through it. They beat him with bats, stabbed him with pitchforks, burned him with torches. Then they wrapped him in chains, tied the chains to cinder blocks, and threw him into the middle of the lake. He sank to the bottom. Timmy looks up at the sky, like he's making a prayer. Then he looks back at us. It didn't take long for reporters to hear, he says. They called it the Stardust Slasher Slaughter. It got so famous no one wanted to send their kids here. They had to shut it down. He pauses, enjoying the silence, then suddenly shouts, "Until now." My first thought isn't even about the story, it's about the fact that he might have just woken up the whole camp. This year they reopened it, he continues, and changed the name to Camp Greenwood so nobody would remember. Timmy leans over the water, and we all look down too, like we're hypnotized by the darkness. But they couldn't hide everything, he whispers, because Masked Kid's body is still down there. A cold breeze slides across the lake and bumps into us. Some say on the last night of camp, Timmy finishes, he comes back up and kills everyone again. We might be the next victims of the Stardust Slasher. For a second, nobody says anything. The lake just sits there, black and quiet. Then, Julian breaks the silence by clapping. Bravo. Best one. Taylor laughs. The theatrics did most of the work, but yeah, good story. Their praise sounds like they're trying to stay on Timmy's good side. I'm sick of it. Sick of watching everyone feed his ego because it's easier than dealing with him when he's mad. So I speak. "Oh, please," I say. That was just a rip-off of every cheap 80s slasher movie. Instantly, everyone looks at me. Timmy's smile twitches like I hit a nerve. "Big talk?" he snaps, "considering you're afraid of a wiener dog." I feel my face burn, but I hold his gaze. "I'll have you know," Timmy continues, voice louder, "that story is true, and you're going to prove it." He looks around at the others like he's taking a vote. We all agree my story was the scariest, right? And Mousie's was the worst. Right. Taylor shrugs like she doesn't care, but also doesn't want to fight with Timmy. Timmy turns back to me, delighted. "Then I order you to jump in the lake right now," he says. "And don't come out until you find evidence that the Stardust Slasher is down there." Taylor cuts in, frowning. "Come on, that's too much." Jesse looks at me, eyes wide with worry. "You don't have to do this." Julian jumps in, smug. "Actually, they do. That's what we agreed on." My heart is beating hard, but not only from fear. There's anger too. Not the loud kind that comes out in yelling. The quiet kind that makes you do something reckless just to prove you can. "Fine," I say. Everyone goes quiet. They're shocked I agreed, like they expected me to beg or cry. But honestly, I just want it over with. Timmy's story is nonsense. The lake is just a lake. The dare is stupid. But the longer we stand here arguing, the longer I stay trapped in this moment with everyone watching me. I start making a plan because planning is how I survive. I'll take quick dives, 30 seconds. Pop back up, do a few more. After 10 minutes, they'll get bored or cold, and we'll go back. Maybe I'll find some old chain or junk and claim it's proof. Worst case, I come back up empty-handed and Timmy still feels like he won, but at least it's done. I step to the edge of the dock. Behind me, Timmy, Julian, and Carter start pestering me to jump already. Jesse and Taylor keep telling me to be careful, like care is something that can protect you from a bad idea. I tune them out and look over the lake. The stars reflect off the water in scattered points, and the moon makes a pale stripe across the surface. The air smells damp and clean like algae and pine needles. For a second, it's almost peaceful. Then I dive. Cold water swallows me head first, and the shock shoots through my body like electricity. My skin tightens. My lungs seize for a moment, then I force myself to breathe out and orient. I come back up, gasping, and I'm surprised to hear cheering. Actual cheering. Like they're proud of me. It's weird. Where was this encouragement when we were competing in camp events? Where was this when I was getting mocked in the cabin? But I take it anyway because any human warmth feels better than being alone. I swim out toward the center of the lake. I don't go too far, not at first. I know how dangerous this is. Water doesn't care if you're proving a point. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong fast. I take a breath and dive. Instant darkness, my face hits cold algae, slimy and unpleasant. I wave my hands in front of me, but I can't see anything. I realize immediately how stupid this is. How am I supposed to find anything in pitch black water? The lake might as well be an endless hole.